Then. All right.
Are we ready?
Think you're ready to roll, Tim.
Okay, let's do this. It's meeting number 4, July 29th, 2020, 9 a.m. Our mission. First off, I want to welcome any guests that are here that have not been a part of this process. We have quite the committee that's put together with the mission to provide recommendations for consideration by the IHSA Board of Directors and executive staff and sports medicine committee in regards to returning to practice and playing football here in Idaho in the fall. And our guiding principles are, of course, Governor Little's rebound plan, and that also includes his back to school plan now, the NFHS Sports Medicine Advisory Committee, phases 1 through 3, local Department of Health and Welfare recommendations, school guidance from the Centers of Disease Control, what's happening in neighboring state, especially Montana, Nevada, and Wyoming, watching what's happening with the NFL and college football guidelines. We've talked about cautious optimism, that has been our main idea with this whole process, is that we want to play football in the fall. We want our kids back on the field. And then I added this to the agenda today because I kept thinking about my college football coach, our quarterbacks coach. He was always telling us adaptability and flexibility. And he would tell us that he would prepare us as best he could for every situation that was going to happen in the game. But the reality is that something was going to be different. Something wasn't going to go the way that it should, and that we would need to be able to adjust to that change, flexible enough to adjust to that change, and then acclimate ourselves and live in that world of change and adapt to that change. And a lot of that stuff didn't really make sense to me until I became older and was coaching my own teams. And then you realize that, some of your best football teams are teams that are adaptable and flexible and can make those changes and live in the world of those changes in those games. And then I kept thinking, okay, how does that relate to our committee and what's happening here with COVID? And it's a little different situation. And I found a Forbes quote. It said, adaptability is the willingness to confront change, your own ideas and preconceptions. Flexibility is more of a willingness to meet others halfway procedurally. And I think we're going to have to be able to do both in this situation. It's as a superintendent, I'd much rather be proactive, have a plan in place, and be able to follow that plan. The reality is that COVID is creating a situation where we have to be reactive, where it's not something we have to be able to make those changes hourly, daily, weekly. I had parents calling me just the other day, and they're basically upset that I don't know what color we are when we're going to start school. I don't have that idea. And so we're just asking people just to be flexible, to adapt, and help us get through this. So with that, we're going to go into our discussion items. We are very close to the start of football. It's 12 days away from the start of practice, and Ty has some updates for us. And Ty, maybe you could talk a little bit about some comments that you're hearing from the board with the late start, spring football possibilities, and then also I think that something that's affecting all of us that's not on your agenda is I'd like Ty to talk a little bit about transfers too, because that's a topic that's coming up quite a bit. So go ahead, Ty.
Thanks, Tim. So first of all, I don't know if you guys heard, you probably did. One of the positive things that I saw yesterday, Wyoming was cleared to start all their sports in the fall on time and as normal as it could possibly be. So it was they were worried they weren't going to be able to do that. So that was good for them, which is good for us in some instances because we have some schools in the eastern part of the state that will play some Wyoming teams. You're aware that Montana's still kind of waiting. Nevada, Oregon now has some issues as far as a start. Washington, California. So really, anything west of us doesn't look good. Anything south, as in Utah, Wyoming and Montana right now, I think we're probably okay. Um, we have some board members, and probably rightfully so, that are a little worried. Our own sports medicine committee has expressed some concerns about the start of our season. Just and as I explained to our sports medicine committee yesterday, I said I'm really hearing from two different groups. I'm hearing from the big schools, and in our minds, we've always kind of classified big schools as 4A, 5A, and smaller schools as 3, 2, 1. Mostly because those smaller schools are the one school for the most part in that one town. Now there are some 4A schools that are that way as well, but that's how we've always kind of classified it. So we sent a survey out real quick last night, and we've received about 60 responses so far. The main question was, are you planning on starting on August 10th? And I haven't looked to see who all has replied. And 100% of the people so far have replied that they're planning on starting on August 10th. And I know our board's going to ask that question because they're hearing from some people, from some schools, from some areas that maybe we should stop and put it on hold for a couple of weeks. And they're seeing things around the state. I know the 1A shootout, I think that's what it's called. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong. That was going to be at Middleton. They canceled that, coming, up north and from the south and the east and meeting in Middleton. And it didn't seem like a good idea to them. And honestly, that's probably a pretty good decision, coming into Canyon County. There in the major portions of Canyon County, there's some more than a couple of cases there. So we're starting to see little things here and there. Some of the bigger metropolitan areas have had some concerns about it as well. So our board, we set up a special board meeting for Thursday just to kind of discuss, because I just didn't want to wait until the 4th before we started discussing, are we going to start normally? As of now, we're still planning on starting normally, but I would say this, there are a lot more, and by a lot more, I'd say probably, 15 to 20 more people that I've spoken to that have concerns now about starting on time than they did 2 to 3 weeks ago, the last time we met. Last time we met, I think we were in pretty good shape. Right now, I'm not sure to be truthful, I'm not sure what type of shape we're in. So, but we still need to move forward because we have got to start planning. Tim started talking about that. You got to be, you got to be ready to adapt. You have to be flexible, and we need to plan. And it's what I tell all the people who call the office and are very upset that we're even considering having activities. If we don't plan this and something good happens and we can return somewhat normally, then we've failed our schools and our kids by at least not being ready to go when it's time to go. We can always push it back a little bit, but the last thing we want to do is on August 9th, all of a sudden say, oh, you know what, we're going to do this or do that. That's not what you should be doing. So that being said, they had some, I have some answers to your questions as far as last time we talked about, somebody asked, I think it was Travis might have been, about the ball boys. It might not have been Travis, but when I asked the sports med people, they said what they're planning on doing, and these are bigger school district people for the most part, with the exception of one, what they're planning on doing is limiting their staff or the people at the games to essential personnel. And so the first question that they asked, which they would ask you guys, are the ball boys essential personnel, or is there somebody on the team that maybe is there that isn't suited down or something along those lines that you could use in that instance? They're aware that, I mean, that's the world they live in too. They're aware that the ball boys are, usually the coach's kids or somebody that wants to help out, but they're really strongly suggesting that only essential personnel be on the sidelines. And if you do have younger kids that you deem to be essential personnel, that they be the same type of precautions that the sports med people are using, which are gloves, masks, and sometimes even eyewear. So those were their two comments about that. I was also asked to check into the Ohio guidelines. The Ohio guidelines are a lot like our recommendations that we sent out. So if you look at our document and a lot of the documents that Tim has talked about Governor Little's plan and then the Idaho reopening framework. A lot of those same type questions are in the Ohio framework as well. So really what the schools have to do is come up with the plan. And if they can do that, then I think then that document becomes pretty close to what the Ohio document actually is when I looked at it. And then the last piece, as far as transfers, Mike and Julie and I had a meeting yesterday, and not that it's surprising, but we've been called by more than a couple of people. I'm probably 15 to 20 people, emails or phone calls from outside of the state that are simply what they're trying to do is find a place for their kids to play. And we have flat out told them, if you are thinking about moving here and it's a COVID related move, not only will your kid at best be JV eligible, but quite possibly will be completely ineligible. The last thing that we need right now is people from other states moving their kids in to try to get them to play football when we're trying to focus on getting Idaho kids to be able to play football. So if they move up here, that could be a completely different scenario, but we're well aware of where these people are coming from. One of the great things about the internet is you can look up pretty easy on Max Preps or Google and find out exactly where these schools are at. I got a phone call from the starting quarterback of a kid in Washington. Dad wanted to know if they could come down here and move into Boise. I don't think they're coming now because, as I told him, he wants his kid to get noticed. Well, now we're also starting to hear maybe they're going to try to come and play fall in Idaho and then spring in Washington or California. I can guarantee you that's absolutely not happening. If they keep trying to mess with it, you're probably going to end up with a kid who's completely ineligible in 2 states. It's tough to tell a parent that. But if you have people that are calling you, be very upfront. Have them call our office. But the chances of them coming to Idaho and playing at all are slim and none, to be truthful. It's just not, we're not focusing on out-of-state kids or parents that are trying to get their kids just because right now we're ready to go and Washington, Nevada, and California are not. Those are not the kids that we want. We want Idaho kids playing. So now if they move here, that's different. But if they're moving here simply because of a COVID issue, I can guarantee you that our board is going to look very closely at that.
So, Ty, can I ask a question? Because
Sure.
we're seeing this like crazy. I mean, I'm hearing kids all the time. My wife sells real estate, and she just had some people that said, we're done with California, and our kids do play sports, and we're moving up. They're buying a house. How are we going to differentiate between that, and how do we handle that? Are we just looking at valid moves, like the parents are up here, they're establishing themselves up here, we're good? I guess that's my only question is, I think we're going to have a hard time differentiating between, I think they are moving up because of COVID, but they're buying homes up here, they're renting up here. How do you want us to handle that, or how do we guide our ADs on that?
I would tell them this, Jason. That's the only shot they have of their kid potentially being varsity eligible. And most likely, if they're coming up here and buying a house, they probably will be varsity eligible. But I want parents to think long and hard about just moving around, thinking that they can transfer their kids any place and go play. They need to be very aware that, honestly, when we talk about change and things, nothing, I would normally say moving up here is 100%. I wouldn't even say that anymore. But I would say it's not, they would have a much better chance. I would say that.
So really we can stay on the lines of a bona fide move. They've moved up here intention to purchase, to like even on the rental side, it better be rental. Parents have moved up. Like if we're out of state stuff, we better do some digging or and make sure they're not coming up with living with cousin Gertrude or Aunt Gertrude. Those our questions just need to be sticklers about that.
You better
I know in Wendell they have an Uncle Gertrude, that's for sure.
You better tell your ADs they better do a lot of checking. Like I said, we don't want to mess things up for our kids. You know, you don't want to mess things up for your kids at your school. And, you know, we do have a rule, you know, if it's a bona fide move rule, but we also have a move for athletics as well. So, you know, it depends on how you want to look at it. I don't know if our board's going to pursue it that much, but I can absolutely guarantee you that if they're moving up here, your ADs had better be asking for documents as far as they completely vacated the house. They're trying to sell it, all of those things. There's going to be more paperwork involved.
Ty, this is Shane at Madison. I've kind of gone with our coaches and told them, because I mean, we were getting the same calls always, and even more so the last week. And I told them it's kind of a time factor. If they're moving up here a week before the season starts, probably not going to happen. But we've had a few move-ins just because of BYUI,
Sure.
where they came up in like June or something, and I said we've got a better chance of getting that done. I look at it more as a time factor, as they're not waiting to see if their state's going to have it versus just coming here also earlier. And it doesn't matter whether, because I mean, in June, we didn't know whether we were going to do it or not, and their states didn't know it. So I felt pretty good about telling them they would probably be approved as long as the whole family moves and gets a house and everything. So that's kind of the approach we took. Now, the later we get, I've told coaches when they've had people contact them that it's going to be a little more difficult because of the timing of things.
No, Shane, that's a real good point, and that's one of the things that, you know, I have my little list of people that have called and emailed, and so I'm very aware. You know, as we always have a list of names that we're watching out for, that we hear through the grapevine or through emails. You can just kind of tell when people are trying to job the system. And
Hey, Ty, and the reality is that if they're denied by the committee, the appeal will not even occur until the middle of September at the board meeting. Is that correct?
well, they could do it one of two ways. They could do it at the board meeting, or they could appeal electronically, which then it goes out to the entire board. So we changed that a few years back. John actually changed that a few years back to help the people. You know, if you're trying to appeal in September, you're missing 2/3 of your season. So there's pros and cons. You don't get to meet in front of a committee, or the board, which you may not get to anyway based on the situation. So there's two ways they can do it, Tim.
Okay.
Anything else?
Does anybody else have any questions for Ty about any of the other areas or concerns before we move on in the agenda? Oh, okay, let's move on. Ty sent from his office the IHSA guidelines. The guidelines follow the similar plan with the governor's plan for reopening schools, and that has a red, a yellow, and a green color associated with it. One of the things that we talked to him about is adopting some of the guidelines from the NFHS that dealt with the sidelines and things like that. Ty, do you want to talk anything about those?
Sure. So the one bad part about, well, the worst part about that document is 50+ pages. But the part that we struggled with was trying to take the reopening framework from the State Board of Education, the governor's guidelines, and then our guidelines, and put them in the same categories. So we think we were pretty close to that. But one of the things that our board wanted to make sure that we mentioned to people, and we've heard this across the board, is people want to make their own decisions. And if they can go, they want to go. And you guys have reiterated that as well. In fact, every sports committee has reiterated that as well. If you can start on time and the school 20 miles away cannot start on time, you still want to be able to start on time, which is one of the reasons we sent that survey out, which kind of shows, so far it's showing that's exactly what you want to have happen. So our board said we don't want to make too many requirements. So we have just the 4 requirements at the very beginning. But those requirements are purposely vague, because what we want is the school districts to come up with their own plan that works for their schools. I will tell you this, I was told yesterday in the sports med meeting that there were some schools that are just going to say, we're just going to open normally, and just go. And I will absolutely guarantee you that if that's your overall plan, you can probably plan on not finishing the season. Because if and when something does happen and you don't have a plan to deal with those things, you're going to be scrambling. And then if it's towards the end, you're going to be stuck in a 2 or 3 week window where you don't get to play. And if it's the start of the playoffs, we're not waiting around for people if we're fortunate enough to get it started in a somewhat normal aspect. So you should have a plan of some sort ready to go for your district. And we would strongly suggest and encourage that each of your conferences get together and come up with a plan so that you know what it's like when you're going to go to another school, another site. We received a message from a superintendent today that said, what we're hearing is, or what we want to see happen is if we happen to have a mask ordinance in our county, and this particular county does have a mask ordinance right now, they want to require everybody that comes in to wear masks. It is no different than you guys determining, hey, we're only going to have 250 people in our stadium. This is what it's going to look like. Two kids or 2 family members per kid, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to have to conform to what you guys say are your guidelines for hosting events. The last thing you want, and Tim joked around a little bit about it at the beginning, wanting to be the ticket taker, and the last thing you want is your ticket takers to have to deal with all those things. So the more communication that you can put out as far as these are the guidelines in our school and at our facilities, the better off you're going to be. The worst thing you can do is have no plan at all. So, and then also remember that those things in the document we sent out are only guidelines. You don't have to use them. So one of the things that we're really trying to focus in on is, let's use Canyon County as an example. You have some smaller schools in Canyon County with minimal, if any, communities, with minimal or no community spread as compared to Nampa and Caldwell. And so should a Canyon County school, usually a smaller school, be subject to the same attendance guidelines as maybe a larger school? If you have a gym that seats 1,500 to 2,000 as compared to a gym that seats 400 to 500, should you both be restricted to the same number of people that can come to your facilities? I can tell you that Wyoming found out, they said they were able to, and I think a lot of the people in Ada County have done the same thing, but they were able to talk to people, talk to the health department and say, this is our plan, what do you think? And the health department has generally, from what I've seen, even around the state, been really, really good at saying, this is what we think you can do. So that's what we would strongly suggest. And then also be aware that there quite possibly is some legislation coming out, maybe even within the next couple of weeks, depending if they have a special session as far as liability coverage and things like that, which in talking with some of the legislators, I believe that would really help our schools out as well, because I know that there are a lot of schools that are really concerned, schools and districts that are concerned if a positive COVID test, and they think that it's from your school district, you want to at least be protected. So that's one of the things that they're looking at.
Any questions for Ty on, a lot of information there. Any questions for Ty on any of that? I think those are great conversations to have with your athletic director, your school principals. We've talked about the importance of establishing guidelines and rules for your conference and determining representation and playoff teams and how that whole process is going to work. Well, I think that the conversations about having a football game and is something that needs to be, you're going to have to talk about. And it's really difficult, I think, to be a football coach right now when you're worried about kids being eligible, you're worried about collecting physicals, but then you're worried about how you're going to deal with water bottles and everything else that goes along with the game. And so it is, I feel for you. I do want to talk about the end of the game. Mike Federico put together, it's at the end of the packet that Ty sent to you with the guidelines in it. And it talked about the way that we would shake hands at the end of the game. And we talked about lining up on the 40-yard line and treating it like a state playoff game, just because some of you felt like it would be uncomfortable if you didn't know how, as everybody was going to be different. Somebody might be doing it. We wanted to be uniform in how we displayed sportsmanship at the end of the game. Feds, did you want to talk about that? And then I'd like to have a conversation and make sure everybody's on board with that.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I had to late entry, right? My name's even Julie on the screen. I couldn't get in. I just want to clear one thing up, because up north in our league, our IEL, we're a little bit different. We have 2 districts combined, and we actually have 4A, 5A teams combined. So our facilities are all over the board. And we talked about making sure everything was the same. Does that mean when Small Moscow hosts Lake City, it's the same as when Lake City hosts Moscow? I mean, they could spread people out and have a crowd and make sure everybody's distance, whereas in Moscow, we can't really do that. But I just want to make sure when I report back to the league tonight that I do it correctly. Can we do what our school can handle, or do we do what the league has to be the same?
So I think that's what Ty just addressed, is that that's an individual school decision
Okay.
on how you're going to do things.
Got it. That's perfect.
It would be very helpful to have everybody that's in your conference on board with it, because when those teams do come to your school versus going to their school, if it's not been advertised and you got somebody at the gate trying to tell someone they can't come in without a mask or whatever the situation is, it's going to make it very difficult for those people that are trying to run your game day operation. So that's what Ty said. It doesn't have to be, but whatever it is and however you're going to do it, it has to be advertised. You got to get the plan out there so people know what it entails. And then, when I was an athletic director, we used to send out a letter prior to any event to the other opposing team, and it would tell them where the locker room is, tell them what the halftime, what was happening at halftime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's probably going to be a situation where you're going to need to include some COVID things in that documentation, just so that they can get the word out to their people, because it is going to be very difficult. I'm just telling you this. We had a basketball tournament here last weekend. To tell people to social distance, to tell people to wear masks, to tell people with the water fountains and the bathrooms, it was very difficult for us. And I think that football, when you talk about some of those large crowds getting together and it's 2 rival teams, man, it's you better have a plan in place before that game starts.
Yeah, no, we've already, thank you. We've already had a few meetings. We're set on all that. We actually have a great plan in place. We're about ready to send it off, but that was one of the things we wanted to make sure is, did it have to be identical because you're in the same league? So we appreciate that. Thanks. Good.
Okay, Feds, can you talk about the end of the game? And then I'd like to find out if everybody that's on the committee here, that's the way we want to do things.
So Tim, Mike actually is not in today. He's not even on the call. So the end of the game protocols that he came up with, and I got hit up at the DMV in Jerome of all places. Like, what are you going to do? What's this no handshake type of thing? It's like, and as I explained to them, and we need to explain to people, there's going to be, in football, there's going to be contact. And that was the question that the individual asked me. It's football. How are you going to stop the contact? I said, there's only one way to completely stop it, and that's to not play. But what we're trying to do is mitigate the number of exposures, or mitigate the risk, so that while maybe Jason and I go head-to-head most of the game, Tim, who maybe is not in the game as much, doesn't end up with the same amount of exposures as maybe I do or Jason does. And so that's the whole premise behind this, is you're trying to limit the exposures for as many kids as you possibly can, knowing that there's going to be risk involved the minute you go up against anybody else that you can't guarantee has the virus. So that's the whole, and they said, well, what about the handshake? So you're telling me that you can't shake hands? I said, once again, it's about mitigating the risks. So if I knew, and limiting the exposures, and that's what this is doing. That's what all of these things are doing for all the sports, limiting the number of exposures that students would have.
What's everybody's thoughts on this? This is how we're going to end the game? To make sure that we're consistent and then people know exactly. There's an announcement that's going to be read by your PA guy, and then everybody was going to raise their helmets in a display of sportsmanship. Is that the way? I think that this does need to be universal.
Tim, yeah, I think that's a great idea. It looks like everybody else is kind of putting thumbs up. I don't see anybody arguing with it. It worked great during baseball. We were lucky enough to have a lot of baseball games. Kids all stepped out, coaches flipped their hats, and it worked out real well. And the crowd was happy with it. It was good.
Okay. All right, then that's what the plan is. And I remember well, the first day of before our first game, we would always have to practice pregame, and this is probably something you're gonna have to practice with your kids. Just to, hey, here's how the game ends, and this is how you line up, and celebrate your victory. So I have fun practicing that. The next thing that's on the agenda, I do see a comment from Brian. He said he wanted to know if anybody's heard about let's see, what is it? What is stadium capacity? And does anybody have any recommendations on seating capacity at the stadium? Any tips? Does anybody have anything that, I know that a lot of it's going to be determined by your local public health district and what color you're in. But anybody have any information for Brian on that? I think.
Hey, Tim, I've got our school nurse talking to our South Central District Health, but they haven't gotten back to me yet. So I just wanted to compare notes with other people.
I think Ada County is probably the worst person you can compare to, but I will tell you what Boise State's going to be at, I want to say they're right around 30%, 27%, somewhere around there, right around 30%. But I also think it determines where you are. Like if you're, I think maybe, Brian, you guys are probably more green than we're closer to yellow and red. If we had an orange, we'd be in there. So, but that's what Boise State's around 30%, and that's the number that's been thrown around up here.
This is Shane again. We held our graduation outside in June and went with social distancing. And with our new stadium, we can hold over about 5,500 people. And we had our architect do the map with social distancing and having 6 feet radiuses for everybody, and it knocked us down to almost 600 people is all we could allow in there.
Wow.
So I feel lucky to have the size of stadium we have, and we could at least get that many people in there. But to really do the social distancing, it's going to knock numbers down, especially for some of the smaller schools. That the whole community shows up to, it's going to really knock their numbers down if it's mandated, we have to have the 6 feet of social distancing.
Anybody else? Next on the agenda is the no dead period in August. I think everybody's aware of that, making plans in preparation for the August 10th deadline. I did send you guys the other state plans on Max Preps. If you clicked on that link, you saw that Washington, Nevada, and California have all moved or postponed their season until spring or till some other date. And then it kind of showed you what the rest of if there were delayed starts, what other states are doing. I thought it was interesting that those were the only 3 states at this time that had determined that they were going to move to the spring. So you're seeing more things come about now here in the last couple of weeks. For example, the Frontier Conference, the Oregon schools and CVI moved their season to the spring, while Montana schools have decided to stay and go with their season as planned. So I guess the question I have with the other state plans, I'd like to kind of know, especially from the north, how you guys are dealing with schedules. Pi has put the schedules on the website, but are you talking about rewriting schedules? Because I know a lot of those teams up in the north are playing those Washington schools.
So Tim,
Okay,
that
so-
might be a question for either Lance or
Yeah.
Sean. I think that Lance, are you on? There you are.
Yep, I got it. Hey, so what we did as a league, this would be the District 1, District 2, 4A, 5A IEL league. Once Washington finally did make an announcement that not only were they bumping, but they were only going to play their league games, we then went into the same thing. We tried to finish out our schedule with only league games. The only exception actually would be Moscow. We're a lot more south, smaller school. We were able to come up with a couple of the missing games with local Idaho teams. They were a division or two lower than us, but it was okayed by the league, and that's how we're finishing out. We may play each other twice, so it might be a Coeur d'Alene home, Coeur d'Alene away versus Lake City type of a deal, but we're keeping it all in league to make sure our kids get a chance to play games. Was
Yeah,
there another
Tim.
part?
Hey, Tim, it's Todd from St. Mary's. One of the games Lance was talking about is St. Mary's and Moscow are going to play a game. And then I lost one more game, and I'm working with the IML schools, the 3A schools, because some of them have lost games to try to pick up that last game. But if we don't, we might only play 7 games this year instead of 8. So it's just right now trying to piecemeal that schedule back together. So
I think it's really important that you guys that are having some of these schedule changes, you get that information to the IHSA as soon as possible, because obviously once we get into the season, other schools are going to be changing schedules maybe midway. And so if we know the update, if we have the updated schedules on there, that's really going to be helpful to all
So,
the
hey, Tim.
teams.
Hey, Tim. Yeah, just a couple of those changes. And we also were trying to check with our leagues or the other leagues that we're playing. We want to make sure, are they doing the same thing? And they're not allowed to play us even though they're in Idaho. But we have that meeting this afternoon. So it should all be finished. Yep.
Great.
So here's a question for Travis then. Sean, and I don't know, Travis, if you're looking at the chat box, but Sean is asking if he thinks teams from the South and Southeast that have games up north are still going to be able to travel up north. I don't know if you or maybe Jason, I don't know if there's any West Ada or Boise Valley schools that are moving up north, traveling up north. Do you guys have an answer to his question?
Yeah, I can provide some insight there. As of late last week, there's no changes. It's going to be we're still waiting for further guidance. Our understanding is that we're playing the schedule as it's written. So far, Utah teams have been allowed to come here. Any schools that are leaving the area to go play are still going to be allowed. I mean, we open up at Ridgeview in week 1, and we're still being told we're going to be good to go for now, but to be prepared to adapt as things change.
Shade for Madison again. We're supposed to play Skyview. I've been in contact with them out of Logan. As of about 8 days ago, they were still a go, just waiting on further stuff. I know we've had some of our baseball kids, youth teams, go down there and play, so they've still been hosting some of their stuff. But as of about a week ago, they were still a go for us to head down there and play.
I think that's a bonus with some of those Utah teams because they start a week earlier than we do. So we'll have a pretty good idea what this thing is going to look like before our teams even hit their first practice.
West Ada schools, Rockies has Thunder Ridge coming over. Mountain View has Highland coming over. I think for us, guys, the biggest concern we have is next week, August 3rd, 4th, right around there, I think all our school boards are going to determine where we're at. If we're in red, and I saw on KTVB that CUNA, Caldwell, Parma maybe, that there was an article that they might open in red. If they open in red, then we're not doing sports. And so I'm hoping that we're going to be yellow. I know Boise will be a day before us, but I think next week's going to tell more. And then my concern is what's that length? You know, are we in red for till after Memorial Day? So if we are, we can't start till after Memorial Day. So right now, I mean, and it's crazy because our programs have continued to do their summer workouts. They've all had camps. We've done great jobs, and so we're there, but we're at the mercy of what our school board does. I think I know what a couple of them are going to vote, which would be yellow, but you know, there's still uncertainty till next week, I think.
Jason, I'll tell you as a superintendent, it's very frustrating because it's not really truly a decision of your local board or your superintendent. It becomes from your health district, and they haven't even figured out the metrics to determine the colors that we're going to be in. I have parents that are calling wanting to know what color we're going to start school, and I can't tell you that right now because those metrics haven't been defined, nor do they probably even exist yet. So you're exactly right. Some of these decisions I made maybe a week before. And then the thing that we're trying to figure out too is, okay, is that for the week or is that for 2 weeks? I don't know that. And so you're right, that is going to cause some frustration, but I think that goes back to what we talked about before, flexibility, adaptability, being able to figure things out as we go, because we are going to have to adjust. It's going to be, you're just going to have to make the best of the situation. And I think this kind of goes back to what the whole intent of this committee is that's to get kids back on the field and to play games and not worry about, who's going to the state championship and what teams are going. Let's get these kids on the field and let's play some football games and try to get back to as normal as possible. Anybody else have anything that they'd like to talk about with any of those issues?
Yes, Tim.
Yeah.
Have we considered what's going to happen if there is a shutdown, the 10 days of practice rule, and how will that play into a postponement of the season, and how will that impact our ability to play when we are allowed?
That's a great question. And Ty, I don't know, have you guys addressed the fact that if the 10-day practice rule?
We won't waive the first 10 days, Travis. I mean, for football being what it is, I mean, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately for the sport of football, that's just not something. I mean, our board's actually talked about increasing, going from 10 days to 12 or 13 or 14 required practice days, just because of the nature of the beast. We're not doing that this year, obviously, but you'll still be required to have the 10 days. I know that we sent out a document earlier that talked about a return to play, but mostly that's for kids with COVID cases. But the same line would be if you had a kid that blew out an ankle or something and he was out for 2 or 3 weeks. Technically, according to our rules, when they come back, they're ready to go Friday night if you need them. Common sense would tell me that the coaches would be able to work that kid in slowly, but the first 10 days are non-negotiable.
Thank you.
I think that's a really important point. And Travis, I'm really glad you brought that up because that's not something we've discussed. But if something happens in there, that will affect your jamboree. It could affect your first couple games. It kind of all depends on when you're allowed to start practice.
So to follow that up, Tim, this is a what if that I've been asked several times. Let's say you get your first 10 days in, you go ahead and play your first game, but then just your school gets shut down for 2 weeks. And then when you come back, like you're saying, you should come back on Monday, those kids are going to be ready to go Friday night? Or do we have another set number of practices to get in before you can play a game?
Well, that's what Ty said. He said that's going to be a local decision with your coaches and your administration and your school. And yeah, Brian, it'd be pretty tough to come back and play if you've been off for 3 weeks. Yeah.
But do we as a committee want to make a recommendation, or we're going to leave it up to every school is different?
Well, it's a tough situation because it might be one kid. It might be a whole team.
I'm using the scenario of a whole team shutdown.
Yeah.
Here's what I can tell you, Brian, as far as from our office and from the catastrophic insurance standpoint, you're still covered after your first 10 days. So, the kid could go a month to say 30 or 40 days. And if you wanted to use them, you would hope that your coaches would look at that and say, you know what, we get it. We're going to play him 30% of the snaps, something along those lines. But 30% of the snaps for an entire team, I don't think you can get an entire game in. But like I said, for our office, you are covered according to, our catastrophic insurance and the rules that we have right now. So if you wanted to change something, just be aware that it's 2 weeks and then you're basically talking a month. And if that's what you want to propose, we can take that to our board, but that's because you're talking 2 weeks for COVID, then another 10 days, which will be 2 more weeks of practice. So it's up to you guys if that's what you want us to do, or if you just want us to leave it the same, leave it as it has been in the past.
Sean said that he thinks those decisions need to be made at the district level. Anybody else?
I think I'm with Sean on this one. I think it's going to be different from area to area and school to school.
Okay. All right, so the next thing that we talked about is, I know that I'm reviewing a lot of the same things, but there's people that have not been on or not heard where we're at, so I'm just reviewing some of the things that we had decided as a recommendation to the IHSA, and that is that if you're delayed, we'll make a week-by-week decision, and then we will not bump. So if you're scheduled to play, Skyview scheduled to play Nampa, and that game does not happen, then that game will not be made up. It will be, we'll move to the next week. So some of that, then you have to go back and you have to look at the conference and how that determines on teams going to the playoffs. And so hopefully everyone has had conversations with their conference, and there's something that's in writing that talks about representation and contingency plans for the playoffs and for conference championships, et cetera, because it will get pretty nasty once you get into the season. And you have to, if you're trying to make decisions then, it's just going to be very difficult. So one team's winning, one team's not winning, and they don't play each other, and one team gets the nod over the other team. So it's really crucial that your athletic directors had those conversations with teams in your conference to determine representation for the IHSA playoffs. Have you heard anything back from that? And then Jason, you had talked about the 5A's doing something different. Have you guys made those final decisions?
I don't know if we've officially made the final decision. I think Judd was going to send out an email to, did you send that out, Judd? Yes or no? To all the coaches in the state. And I hate to speak because I know Shane's kind of been a part of this, and Sean, we've talked a little bit, but I think instead of using max preps, we would figure out a way that we would have two from our district, one from the north, one from the east, if we got to that point, and we'll give you that before we start the season. But we haven't quite finalized it, but that's what we're thinking.
Yeah, I didn't send it out to everybody, Jason, but I sent it out to you and John, Todd Simmons, Chris Kulig, and I sent it to Armando at Rigby and Sean at Coeur d'Alene, kind of what we were thinking rather than using the max preps, how we would come up with playoff scenarios. So like Jason said, I sent out the idea, the responses I got were good, that people liked it, but I believe Jason and John will probably come up with a final document for our district.
Tim, I haven't heard anything else. We've sent out the request to let us know before the season, so we'll remind them again.
Okay. All right, and then just to kind of review that there will not be a mythical state champion. the contingency plan for everyone else, unless IHSA receives documentation, is that Max Preps will decide number 1 and number 2 in a championship, or the top 4, or the top 8 quarterfinals if the season is suspended due to COVID, or if there's a situation where some teams can play and other teams can't, and that's how we would go about our business using Max Prep. Any last minute thoughts on that? Because this will probably be a final recommendation that goes to the board.
Hey, Tim, I sent an email out to all 4A head football coaches. While it was not, wasn't unanimous, but it was widely accepted that Max Preps was really the only universal equalizer in this process that should be given a fixed amount of weeks, whether it be 1, 2, or 3 in a playoff scenario, that the only real fair way related for Max Prep. So 4A head coaches, again, there were 3 or 4 outliers, but for the most part, the guys responded and supported the Max Preps idea.
We also, go ahead.
Something, sorry. And we are in a different boat, and that's the part. And I talked to Ty Jones last week about this because, being an old Magic Valley guy, it's just different in other parts of the state, but if we do face Boise's in red and they're online and they're not having sports, if Nampa, which was in the paper, is in red and they're not having sports, and I don't know if this is just a 4A, 5A level or just a 5A level. I know this is different. I don't want to say we're not having a season. So then I want to say, okay, does this committee need to at least discuss the possibility of what are alternatives? I mean, do you play football in the spring? I mean, I know we said no before, but if Boise's canceled, CUNA's canceled, we just took half of our 5A teams, or that part. And so I just think we probably need to revisit that, because when we started this in June, I think we were all optimistic that we were going to make something happen. But what if we start next week, we find out that 5 or 6 of our teams in the 5A, and I think this is just a unique situation for us. What if we have 6 or 7 of our teams out of the 18 in the division or in the state pod aren't going to have teams? What are we going to do?
I think he makes a really great point. We had talked about, this is going to be a week by week. Some of the decisions that we're going to need to make are going to be week by week. But the reality is that you're probably going to have a more difficult situation in those larger cities and those 4As and 5A schools. It probably is a situation where it would affect a majority of the schools versus the smaller 1, 2s, and 3s. My idea on it is that we're going to have to continue to meet as a committee. I don't know how Ty feels about that, and I know that the IHSA board of directors will make all final decisions, but I really think that our input is going to be valuable to them and how we're going to move forward in case we do have situations like Jason mentioned.
Well, and Tim, that's one of the things that we'll be talking about on Thursday. And then there's also Tomorrow, correct. And then there's also a piece on our regular board agenda to talk about any COVID issues, of which that will be one that potentially could be coming up.
So I went back to my notes from the first meeting, and one of the questions was, how flexible can we be between 5A through 1A? And at that time, we were saying everything needed to match. Is that still, or will start dates maybe not match? Maybe some divisions go after Labor Day, some go before, or is there a possibility even fall and spring don't match? Or are we still saying that everything has to match?
That's the beautiful thing about this virus, is that we continue to change the rules, Brian. And I agree with you. I don't think it is. I don't think it is the same anymore. It was actually brought to my attention that maybe the 4As and 5As should move to the spring, and the 1s, 2s, and 3s should play in the fall. That was a recommendation that came to me. So I don't think that. And Ty, you'll have to speak on this, but I think Brian's right. I think things have changed. We have to figure out a way to get these kids on the field, and it might be different from a 5A school versus a 1A school.
So Brian, the reason that we brought that up is we didn't want one classification doing something completely different on their own. That was the premise behind it. Now, that being said, I would say, as Tim just put it, things are changing so much. I would think that our board would be interested in listening to that. Ideally, of course, you'd like to have everybody on the same schedule. That's why we have state track and all 1A through 5A all show up on the same weekend. I mean, that's one of the things that our state has always done, and we kind of like it that way. But that being said, I don't think that these are just different times. And so, it's no one's going to be completely happy, and it's possible. I wouldn't say that it's going to happen, but it's possible our board might want to take a look at that and say we should move the 4s and the 5s. I don't know if they will. We'll find out more tomorrow.
Hey, I don't know the answer. This is brutal. It really is. But if you throw 4s and 5s in there, I'll just speak for us. Moscow's a 4. I've got like 15 kids that play every sport, and that's it. And a lot of them already lost their spring sport. So if we say, hey, football's going in the spring too now, you've got to choose. It's a big deal. And I get it. The 5As, you guys are in a different boat. You got a lot of kids that now are just specializing in one, and that's awesome. And I really hope everybody gets to play everything. I'm just saying this might be hey, let's get the superintendents on the phone. I mean, there's a lot of financial stuff I couldn't do. I could not, because if football does it, I guarantee you every other sport's going to want the same thing. They're going to say, if they can move, we can move. And for me, it'll be a nightmare. Obviously, we're going to do what the IHSA says, but it financially, logistically, our school can't handle it. And then I've got to make some really unpopular decisions regardless. And I know you guys all know this. I just wanted to throw that out there, because if I don't, I'll get in trouble down here or up here.
Well, and I was thinking of what the survey said yesterday before we even jumped to the whole spring issue is, what about some people starting after Labor Day, but some people still starting August 10th? Is that a possibility, Ty?
Brian, everything's a possibility. So I can tell you, when I looked this morning, that's what's so frustrating about this is, we're 10 days away from the start of fall sports, and we honestly, in a lot of cases, don't have a clue as to what it's going to look like. And, everybody on this meeting and people listening in are control freaks by nature. And for that to happen, that's really tough. But when I looked at the survey results, and like I said, there were about 60, the vast majority of them, probably 2/3, at least at the time, said, we don't need to all start on the same. They all said they wanted to start August 10th as of now. I mean, every single one of them, but 2/3 said, doesn't matter if Wendell can't go on August 10th, but Valley can. The 2/3 of the people said that's not a big deal to them, which is kind of what every committee has always said right from the start. If you can't go, hopefully you can play catch up. Every committee, every sport. So that's probably where we're at right now. We'll know a little bit more. All I would say is be prepared to pivot on a dime here in a week or so if something were to happen. And remembering that Tim said it, the main goal for all of this, I would love to see state championships occur. It would be fantastic. And I would love to see fans in the stands. And I like to go watch football games, but the number one goal for this, for all of our groups, has to be getting our kids to participate and getting them to participate safely.
Yeah, Lance, I'm with Lance on this. In that I have multiple coaches that coach spring sports. I've got varsity coaches, JV coaches, and freshman coaches on my staff that coach track and baseball. I've got a whole bunch of kids that run track and play baseball. So that would be a really hard thing for me. kind of get decimated if that happened in terms of key kids and even maybe more importantly, coaching staff. So moving football to the spring would be really rough. A flip is a little different, you know, not that I love that either, but flipping in my case would be better than just pushing football to the spring because of all those shared kids. But again, that's not ideal either, just trying to think of all scenarios. So.
Did we lose Tim?
Yeah, he's done. He's had enough. He's
out. He's
talking
out.
to Moscow complaining. Hey, Judd, that's a great one. And I thought that might have been off the table since we're so late in the game. But a flip is a heck of a lot better than a replace in our area as well. I just know that whatever we do set, I would hope the IHSAA considers, because there's a lot of bullying by parents once you get going. We had summer baseball, Legion baseball, and then some club stuff going. Everybody was begging to play. They promised, whatever you can do, we'll go by. Shoot, we get 2 weeks in and they want to change the rules now. And they didn't have a real governing body to tell them no. And so it turned into a mess. I mean, the kids got to play, but the behind the scenes stuff was horrible because there was not a whole lot of leadership once they got to play. The parents started taking over, making their own rules, and then what do you do? It's so anyhow, that's a big problem once you get going.
Well, here's, one of the things, and I mentioned this at one of our very first meetings, is if we were to change any seasons, and guys, trust me, we can tell that it's getting close to the start of the season because we're getting a lot more phone calls and people are worried, and I'm not going to lie. We should be a little bit worried. I mean, cautiously optimistic, but also worried. But one of the things that I don't see happening is if we were to move sports seasons and then something were to happen, you need to remember, if something were to happen in the fall, I can absolutely guarantee you, excuse me, that we are not going to lose 2 spring sports seasons in a row. We will move the spring sports right back to where they were, and they'll have, for lack of a better term, full billing or top billing for that particular season because it would be unfair to those sports. Trust me, this whole thing's unfair to all sports. But it's that would be one of the things that we would really be, I know we'd be really concerned about because it's, look, there's no easy answer for this. When Judd was talking about, the coaches and the kids and having to make choices and, it's not even a good answer, Judd, but the best answer that I've ever seen about that from a state that did that was, well, at least they have an answer to get to make rather than no answer at all. And I don't like that answer, but it was the best one that I've ever seen because at least there's opportunities for kids to participate. But, to me, it would be, it might be a little bit better that we tweaked the length of seasons potentially rather than try to put seasons on top of each other, because the last thing you really want to do is have kids have to make a choice. I mean, kids make enough choices as it is. So, but that's definitely something that'll come up. As I said before, be prepared to pivot on a dime if something gets changed here pretty quick, because I really do think it's quite possible that that's exactly what might happen. Tim, you back?
Yeah, I apologize. My battery went dead, but I did get a response from David Young at Skyview. He wanted to know what the logistic issues with flipping the fall and spring sports. Could you speak on this? I might have missed some of the things that you said. Is that a possibility that the board would consider at this time, flipping those sports? Is it too late? Are we too late, or is it?
We're pretty late. Here's another thing to consider. Every other sport is on schedule right now to go. So as of now, volleyball, soccer, cross country, swimming in some form or another. I mean, the one thing that pick what news report you want to listen to, Tim. If you did, and I think I mentioned this and you might have missed this, if we did flip, the thing is, if something were to happen in the fall, we'd move the spring sports right back and then fall would be done.
Right.
So it'll come up on Thursday, I'm sure, tomorrow.
Anybody else have anything on, I do want to throw this out there, and this is for folks that have not been involved with our committee, but that if we do get into a situation where we have to determine teams by max preps and playoffs, or if you're a school possibly in the Boise Valley and you missed 5 games for the year, you would have the opportunity to ask the IHSA to play a bowl game at the end of the year. So there would be an additional game that you can play. So we are going to have the opportunity for bowl games. I'm not quite sure Ty knows exactly what that's going to look like or how they're going to I don't think that they're going to be a part of the process of collecting any gate on that. I think that would be just something between the 2 schools, but that is a possibility. Okay. Anybody else have anything for the good of the order today? I think that pretty much covers everything. I do want to talk about our next meeting. The IHSA meets tomorrow, and then they have their official board meeting in the first week of August. Do we want to meet again before the start date on August 10th, or do we want to meet after we get football started on the 10th? I think the recommendation from all of us is still that we start on the 10th. So Ty can bring that forward tomorrow. Does anybody have any comments on when they would like to meet again?
Hey, Tim, I just think it makes sense, and it's doing our job to meet beforehand. We get any information we can from that IHSA meeting, and then we solidify everything from there. We're the ones they're coming to for answers, so I think we should, if that's good with everybody else.
Okay, so are we talking, it would obviously be the first week in August. Should we shoot, there's an IHSA board meeting on August 5th, which is and then the annual meeting is in the afternoon. Ty, is it better for us to meet like on the 6th or maybe on the 3rd?
Well, I don't know what we would determine on the 3rd.
Okay.
To be honest with you, I would say what would work best. The 6th for us, Tim, is completely booked with the IASA conference. We have new principals coming in here, sports med committee. We could either go late on the 5th. I mean, if you wanted to do it at 6 or 7 o'clock at night, we could do it on the 5th, or it would have to be on the 7th.
Okay, it's Friday morning on the 7th. A lot of football coaches, I know that's their break before they get started. Maybe that's not a good time. I'm open to either the morning of the 7th or the evening of the 5th. Everybody want to kind of let us know what works best for them?
Sean said August 7th works for him.
7th works for me.
I see Matt and Ryan are either flashing gang signs or showing us that it's the 7th. So.
All right, let's shoot for the 7th, and then let's make it, the people in the north are not going to be happy with me, but let's make that meeting at 8 o'clock Mountain Time on the 7th. That means that the meeting will start at 7 for those guys up north. Is that right? Yes. So that's 8 a.m. Mountain Time on August 7th. Ty, would you please send out a invite? And folks, you will have a little bit of an update. Ty, maybe you could make us aware of the update after tomorrow's meeting. Just kind of send the committee out a little bit of information of what was discussed, and then we'll definitely have some information after the meeting on the 5th.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, there's no voting tomorrow. It's going to be discussion only. If there is anything to be voted on or put out, it will be on the 5th. But I will send something out anyway.
Is the meeting on the 5th open to the public, or is it a online meeting?
It's an online meeting, Brian. So is it open? Yeah, but it's online.
Okay, so I just wanted to review. We'll see you guys all on the August 7th at 8 a.m. Mountain Time. And that will be for preparation for the start date and our recommendation to begin on August 10th with our main goal to get kids back on the field with the idea of cautious optimism, adaptability and flexibility. Adaptability, that's a tough word for me to say. And flexibility, and just making sure that we understand that there's going to be change, and nobody has the answers. We need to be understanding of frustration and understanding of parents and kids and coaches that are scared or concerned, and understanding of schools that are raring and ready to go, and work together to make this thing happen, because it needs to happen. Football on Friday nights needs to happen, and you guys know that just as well as I do. So have a great 2 weeks, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.